to Platon. Platon is from Athens and has long experience with flying share. But the most important is that Platon was born in Alexandria and he lived some time in Egypt, in Cairo. So he has experience with Egypt. But now he will speak about share. From time to time, he can speak about Alexandria. Platon, the floor is for you now.
Right, thanks a lot. I wish I was there. I really wish I was there. September is a fantastic time in Egypt, and when I was little, we used to go hunting in the desert around Alexandria. Anyway, this is not what we're talking what my talk is about, and what I was trying to do is actually give you some idea of why we have share, and also give you an idea of the sort of problems that we had running share in Greece, because Greece was one of the countries that entered share in the very first, in 2004. And at the time, it was the first, there were no panel surveys at all. There was no interdisciplinary surveys, and no one had ever conducted a survey using laptops. So we were all told it can't be done. It's not possible. People will not want to answer the questions. And we surprised. We had a share of problems. So what I want to do is give you an idea of why it is interesting and important that a survey like share be conducted in general, and in Egypt especially, but also give you an idea of the sort of problems, the practical and operational problems that you have when trying to run a share. And just because, just listening to me, it might be a little boring. After the break, a colleague from the survey agency that have been running share will give you 4 examples of particular anecdotes of what they had to meet when trying to conduct share in Greece. So what I want to do is I want to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, Dr. Platon. Yes.
Yes, you can. Right. Okay. So to conduct a new statistical survey in a subject which is still unknown, it's one of these unknown unknowns. It's a little bit like when in the old television series Star Trek, you have the Starship Enterprise, and that was when it was approaching a new planet. They didn't know what to expect. They had some vague idea, and exploring longevity, what happens in a situation, in a world where people live much longer than they used to be, is in a way like exploring an unknown planet. So this is why I called my presentation Mapping Planet Longevity, and interdisciplinary investigation of longevity in Europe and in Egypt. So my talk will break into 3 parts. First is the open questions of longevity, both worldwide and local issues, and why it's important to have an international data source. This will introduce the question of share as a way of answering the open questions, and I will continue. Well, I will conclude with some thoughts about implementing share as a project, which had come from the experience of running 15 years this survey in Greece, which is is something like a basket case of the European Union. I mean, we're perpetually at the end, and we're asking for subsidies, we're having crises, we're threatening the Eurozone, and nevertheless, we are a country we have been in the European Union since 1981, so a very long time, already over 40 years. And but Greece shares a number of common features with Egypt, both in the way that the family is structured, the way that the society ages, but also largely in the sort of infrastructure available. And as I mentioned, that there'll be a period of light relief when Vicky Markopoulou will give you 4 practical examples of came from experience in Greece. So first, longevity. Longevity, what is it? Is that we will all live longer lives. That is something that is a characteristics of individuals. And so each one of us, each person can look forward to being able to live much longer than their parents. This is something that humanity has always wanted. It's an unqualified blessing. So the question is, this blessing, it depends how much longer we will live, how we will live, and who will live. So all these, the longevity differs by individual types of individuals, by country, and we are entering areas which are not known, and that is why a survey is planned to fill this gap. Now, it's important to distinguish the notion of longevity, which is an individual attribute, from aging, which is a societal attribute. It depends on society as a whole. And so aging is referring to the share of aged people in a particular country. As a matter of simple mathematics, in addition to longevity, people living longer, the population aging also depends on fertility, how many children women have, but also the incomings and goings of the population, so immigration, so how many people leave, how many people come. So aging, the aging economics, the study of aging has to do with how and whether a society that contains many more older people, how differently it works from one that does not. So it has different possibilities, different potentials. The intergenerational relations would differ. Social and economic policy would differ. So we will be living longer lives, but in an aging society. So it is possible to have longevity without aging. And in fact, in sub-Saharan Africa, this is the situation, because they have the societies which are still very young, and the percentage of aged will not rise for some time, but they're still having to cope with longevity. So population aging, in a way, complicates dealing with longevity. So individuals will certainly live their lives differently, but societies must also adapt to allow them to do so, and to do it successfully. So we're talking about a planet longevity, but in something like an aging galaxy. So there have always been very old people. Of course, in the Bible and the Quran, there's Methuselah, who is supposed to have lived 800 years plus. In fact, well, he might not have lived quite as long, but we do know of historical cases of people who have lived very long. Aeschylus, the Greek tragedy writer, the theatrical writer, he died at the age of over 90 in 456 BC. And it's actually, there's an interesting story about Aeschylus when he was 90. his children decided that, this is no way, because we're still waiting to get our father's property. And so they went to the courts and said, we want the property back, because whoever heard of someone 90 years old being able to handle his property. And the court in Athens in the 5th century BC actually decided that Aeschylus was perfectly able to do that, because he had just finished a new play of Oedipus, the third part of Oedipus. However, society has always had very old people, so it's not something. So it was not something unheard of, but there were always the exception. So humanity always wanted to live long. In fact, in virtually all cultures, one of the wishes when you meet someone is, may you live long. Now the difference, and this is the area where we have to zero in the surveys, is that what used to be the exception is now becoming the rule. So societies as entire entities are becoming older, which is something that never happened before. I'll give you an example of the type of difference. There is in economics, there's a theory called the economic theory of democracy, where in that theory, it says if people vote and if they decide according to their preferences, when a decision is taken to a vote, then the deciding vote is the person in the middle, because that is the 50% plus one that will decide whether, for example, to raise taxes or not to raise taxes. So if the decisions are taken by majority and opinions depend on age, what is crucial, the person in the middle, the person of the middle characteristic, the median person, is in a way something like a dictator, because what he wants, what he or she wants, will be what society will decide. So in an aging society, what that means is that the median voter, the decisive voter, is increasing. His or her age is increasing. It used to be around 40, around 2000. And after 2030, will go to about to 60 or more. Now, what difference does it make? Someone who is 40 years old still has children at school, still is working, is still fully engaged in production. He's not really worried about health, because his or her health is not an issue. But someone who is 60 is quite likely to have already retired, to be drawing a pension, and he will be much more concerned about his health. And so the types of decisions that someone who is 40 will take will be very different from someone who is 60. So in a place like Greece, and that is the very low retirement ages in the pension system also help. After about 2030, pensioners were expected to be an absolute majority. So if you're trying to convince pensioners to reduce their pensions, you basically, you're not very successful. So the question is, we are moving towards a situation which we know will be different from what it is now and what we are familiar with, but we don't know how different. So the question is, in order for society to plan itself, build hospitals and things, but also for individuals to plan their own lives, whether to go to university, what to study, when to marry, how many children to have, what kind of house to live in, what to do with your parents and grandparents. In an aged society, we're already having many more cases of generations of 4 families, families of 4 generations. So we have the great-grandparents, the grandparents, the parents, and the children. And the great-grandparents are sufficiently active to begin to play an active role in the decisions of the family. So the dynamics inside the family are changing. So we have these changes to aging, and the issue is that these changes will be taking place in a world that we know is already itself going to be very different, because technology will be very different. Artificial intelligence and robots are changing our lives. Globalization, all these issues which are known together as the future of work. I mean, just to give you an example, in AI in Japan, which is the society which is most aged in the world at the moment, and the Japanese have an aversion. They don't like to meet people from different cultures and foreigners. So rather, what the Japanese are trying to develop, so trying to develop robots to look after the Japanese old people. And they've even developed some robots which are able to tell jokes in Japanese. So I'm not very good on Japanese jokes, but and I guess the Japanese jokes mentioned by robots are no better. But in any case, I mean, it's just giving an idea of the societal uncertainty that we are faced. So within this general question, I mean, just to give you an idea of what is happening, this is a picture. I always wanted to show Egyptian pyramids. So in fact, I'm showing Mexican pyramids and Italian pyramids, they're demographic pyramids. I don't know whether you know them. It's just a way of showing the population, the structure of the population. It's like a family photograph of an entire population, because you have the ages and the males on the left and the females on the right, and you have each older population appearing as a higher stage in the pyramid. So what we're having is that it's comparing Mexico, which was a developing country in 1950, and Italy, which had developed older. And we see in 2010 there's already a difference between Italian and Mexican pyramids. We have this bulge in the center. That is known as the baby boom generation. So the generations, I mean, my generation roughly, who were born in the 20 years after the Second World War, when fertility rates were high, but mortality was dropping. My point about this is that aging is something which is happening across the world. It's happening in Italy and in Mexico, but it's happening at different speeds. And ultimately, if you look at it in the situation in 80 years from now, in 2100, the shape of the pyramid in Mexico and Italy are basically the same. But in the meantime, there are differences between. So if we look at aging as a global phenomenon, we have the situation moving to a common end point, but there's considerable differences in between. And this creates a number of possibilities of cooperation. So in terms of the demographic pictures, there's 6 certainties, and behind those certainties, there's 4 open questions. So the 6 demographic facts are known, so we know, and I won't dwell for them for very long. The proportional numbers of people over 65 will rise for the next 30 years. The proportional numbers of people over 80 will rise even faster, much faster, in Europe, as the number of people over age will rise over the next 20 years by 3 times. And at the same time, as the number of children being born is being reduced, the proportional number of people in the labor force is already falling in Europe and in the advanced countries, and will fall eventually everywhere. Now, those are the 3 sort of headline figures. There's 3 other figures which are less well known, but are equally certain and affect the geographical distribution of aging. The baby boom, the bulge that you saw in the case of Italy, would lead to acceleration aging to about 2035 or so. So the current decade is in the advanced countries is decisive. Now, the 5th point is that the time structure of these developments differ. So as in all countries, we have a fall in fertility. However, the fall in fertility in some countries came later than in others. So what that means in places like Egypt, for example, the population is still growing because it depends, the labor force is still growing because it depends on the fertility 20 years ago, which was still high. So that means that there is what is known, the democracy is called the demographic dividend in some countries, such as Turkey or Egypt, at the same time as the rapid aging in others. This creates the possibility of cooperation, but also is the source of tensions with migration, etc. Finally, the rise in longevity may be combined with greater dispersion, greater differences between countries and within countries. So these are the 6 certainties. Behind these certainties, there are some doubts. Okay, so the first open question is, how much longer are we going to be living? So there's 2 arguments there. What the UN, the European Union, Eurostat, all statistical surveys everywhere are producing projections of life expectations. Now, the question is, it's quite likely that these projections are systematically biased downwards. In other words, it will be possible to live much longer than the current data says. So this picture here is what is known as the maximal life expectancy. So it's the country in the world, each year has the country in the world that has the highest life expectancy. So for example, at the moment it's Japan has the highest life expectancy. 100 years ago, it was, I think, Sweden. So, and there are 2 arguments that can convince us that this is that we will actually be faced with even longer life expectancy than in the projections. One is the first statistical argument, is that if in projecting life expectation, statisticians and demographers are obviously limited to using people who have completed their lives, so that you know how long somebody lives. So that essentially means that what you're doing is you're projecting your life expectation based on what your grandmother or your great-grandmother had, what her life was like. So, and to Russian demographers, what they did is that they used, rather than mixing up generations by using all data, they just they tried to project to see what the trends was in life expectancy if you use data from within the same cohort. So that meant, of course, that they could only, they had data going only up to 1950 because the people born after 1950 are still alive. So they had to use data from people for whom they knew the whole of their life. So what they did this is very interesting, is that this is the gray line at the top. It was taken from a Russian magazine, so it's in Russian, it doesn't matter. The maximum, the bottom line is the trend of the historical data, the normal data that you can get in international publications. The gray line is the trend if you just limit yourselves to the situation from within the same cohort. So, and it means if you use the bottom line, it means that the most that somebody lives around the world. So this is the potential life. It's not the actual life. It's the country that has the highest life expectancy. That is growing something like by 3 months a year, which is very, very high in any case. But if you look at the within cohort, the open VOPL approach, then the increase is 5 months every year. So that means that you can, the potential is for us to be living, to be able to live crucially, by far more than what is being centered. But secondly, there's a scientific argument, is that up until 10 years ago, longevity was not a separate subject of study, i.e. at the molecular biology levels, at the level of the cell. But since about 2005, a number of scientists are actually looking inside the cell and saying, how do organisms age? So they're looking at aging as a process, not as something that results from meeting disease, from curing disease, but as a process on its own. And as a result of this, there's a concentration of research on this, which incidentally was greatly accelerated by the research that took place in the context of the pandemic. And that the scientific discoveries which are coming at a very rapid pace raised the possibility of very rapid progress, which would lead to anti-aging drugs. Anti-aging drugs mean that they would actually have the potential to reverse the aging process. So I'll give you an example of someone who would want to have his aging process reversed. And this is very exciting as a scientific fact, but also creates a great deal of unease on the social level, because you can imagine if it was possible for anyone to go and essentially buy extra lives, because this is what we're talking about, is you will be able to access certain drugs which will allow you to live some extra years, and that the social and economic implications of these have not been worked out. It's one of the examples of the difference of in approach between something which affects an individual, so an individual and taking everybody else as given, and once a particular change affects more people together, and then you have to worry about the wider social effects. So the bottom line is that it is inevitable, I think, that it will be possible for people to live much longer than they are now, and much longer than governments expect them to live, because governments are doing their own planning in their in the kind of hospitals they they build the way the pension system works, and they have built into the projections essentially something which is derived by the black line at the bottom. But whereas if we're actually on the gray line, then that means that we will actually live much longer than we are expected. So this is the first open question. The second open question is, what will be the added years like? We all know, we know with certainty that each of us will live longer than his mother and father. But what will the extra years be like? Will it be active life, so you can enjoy life and you go on excursions, and or will you be bound to a bed in a hospital, or perhaps suffer from things like Alzheimer's? So it's a question, it's a key question, and because it differs completely about how the aging will serve. So there's three hypotheses which existed, have been stated in the literature over the last 30, 40 years, and they have starkly different projections. First is the compression of mobility, the hypothesis of the compression of mobility. That means that the period of bad health at the end of the life will actually be shorter. So the extra years will be healthier years. This is associated firstly by James Fries, who in 1980, an American doctor, and his point was that he was based that chronic illnesses fall faster than the rise in life expectancy, so which means more healthy years of work, and at the same time, certain healthy behaviors like smoking is reduced, and exercise, etc., is pulling down, is creating the possibility of limiting certain chronic diseases. Now, at the other extreme is the hypothesis of expansion of mobility, and which was associated by Greenberg, and the point there is that the gains that we have seen in the previous slide were really primarily due to dramatic improvements in the younger age groups. So it's mainly child mortality and dealing with the and also improvements on nutrition, etc., which have led to dramatic improvements in younger groups. And once you have gained these improvements, the gains now are harder, they're more expensive, and they come at a lower pace. And finally, the third hypothesis is something in the middle. What it says is essentially it's a dynamic equilibrium, is that you have a change in the health profile, light mobility is rising, and the serious mobility falls. And the point about health economics, and I think most of you listening to me are medics, is that you have this a phenomenon which is when you deal with an illness, someone survives an illness, he or she becomes susceptible to further illnesses as you go along. So what you have is you have the problem of problems because of success. So survival of one illness makes someone available to be a victim of other illnesses. So what at the time of the onset, when what you essentially had, you had these three hypotheses, which gave you completely different ideas of what to expect about what kind of quality of the extra lives, extra years that were going to be lived. And in fact, an OECD meta research in the mid 1920s, mid 2000s in 12 countries found that there were completely mixed results. They had compression in the US, Italy, Holland, Denmark, and Finland. You had expansion mobility in Sweden, Japan, and Belgium, which is really interesting because both Nordic countries, Finland is definitely compression, Sweden next door is the other way around. And in two countries, in the UK and France, you had conflicting results. You had different sources giving you different results. So it's very important for planning, both on individual and on a social level, to know which of these hypotheses is closer to the truth. And what it depends. This is not something, it will depend on habits, on lifestyles, economic potential, but also on public policy. So in choices which are taken at the social level. So the third question, it comes to this, is can we actually do something? Is the longevity something like, you know, you step in an elevator and it just takes you up and you don't have to do anything? And we have a dramatic warning from the United States. United States is the most advanced country, and yet for 3 years, United States. And interestingly, and this is the subject of a book by Angus Deaton, who's very well known as a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He called it, it was not a general phenomenon, but it was related to deaths of despair, what he called deaths of despair. So the types of deaths that were increasing were suicides, violent deaths, and the opioid epidemic. And there are also deaths which affected a particular segment of the population. So it's working class, lower educated, white males. So in other words, it's roughly, it's the people who voted for President Trump. So the people who felt themselves marginalized, who felt marginalized by globalization, whose jobs were at risk, and heavy industry, for example, in Eastern United States had to close down because of Chinese competition. Those kinds of people, their life expectancy was fell to such an extent so they actually pulled the whole thing down. So that's one example where things don't seem to work automatically. Another is closer to home. We had a 25% drop in income in Greece as a result of the financial crisis between 2008 and 2012 or 13. And at the same time, as quite large health cuts as part of austerity. And the question is, you know, would this pull life expectancy down? There is some indication that some diseases were worse, others are not. But it's an example of the type of influence which will actually could negate the rise in in health status. So the crucial take home is what happens is not automatic. What happens to society as a whole and to the overall level is affected by choices which are taken both by individuals, but the type of choices which affect society as a whole, the economy and society. So it's not something which can be taken for given, and crucially, it's something which can be directed and managed. So we can decide, you know, that there is one direction we would like to go to, and another one which we would prefer to avoid. And it is possible, once you know where you're going, to try to steer your way one way or the other. The fourth question is who will benefit? So, as we said, longevity is something that humanity has always aspired to. We all say, well, may you live 100 years. It's sometimes when people are very close to 100, you say, well, you know, it sounds, it's just a little too pessimistic to say live 100 years. However, when we're looking at how long people live and the quality of that life, this gives rise to new inequalities. We have inequalities. These inequalities come between countries which age at different speeds. That creates a possibility of a win-win solution. Migration, for example, by taking people from who don't have a job in low productivity countries, in countries like Germany, for example, that have high productivity and don't have enough workers. I mean, that is a change which helps both, win-win. So economists know that this is the opportunity for cooperation. However, this very real economic benefits are blocked by social and political reactions, and which are characterized both in the US and in the States. An example of the sort of absurdity of this thing, the long-term care, the care of the aged in Europe depends almost exclusively on immigrant carers, from people from coming to Europe from outside. And that applies both in countries like Italy and Greece, which rely on informal support in the family, but also in systems like the Scandinavian system, which have old age people's home. The people who work there are a large majority in some places are immigrants, who are, however, now blocked by public policy. So that creates a gap. You know that the people over 80 will be triple in number in 10 or 15 years' time, but there will be no one to care for them because they have fewer children. Even if their children decide to look after their parents, there are not enough of them. They might be living in different cities. The immigrant carers are blocked. So the solution might be the robots, like in Japan. However, this is a macro issue of inequality between countries, but also, and more importantly, I think for an individual, is a question between individuals. So our notion of what is someone well off and badly off, so rich and poor, is once you introduce longevity, you introduce a new dimension to inequality. So we know that richer people already live longer. So one shudders when you think that if rich people can also buy aging treatment, which allows them to live even longer. For example, the OECD has calculated that if you could put a factor of how long people live on pensions, the fact that richer people live longer means that the pensions as a whole end up transferring money from the poor to the rich, whereas social policy is supposed to do the opposite. Social policy is supposed to take from the rich and give to the poor. But if the rich live longer than the poor, and if the rich draw their pensions for far longer than the poor, then the pension system in effect will end up transferring money from something like a reverse Robin Hood. Robin Hood robbed the rich to give to the poor. If pension systems which don't allow for the length of life might end up doing the opposite. Now, so whether the length of life is one aspect of inequality, but another crucial thing is the ability to adapt to the new type of living that an aging society requires, introduces new inequalities even further. So which have to do with how successfully you adapt to the new situation which faces you. So you have rich versus poor, so you have adaptable versus rigid. So the early adapters are the ones who will gain, and they will do so by making your life much more flexible. So if you think of society and the type of changes that will need to be to live a successful long life, successful and healthy long life, the society will break into three groups. The top X% will be the eager adapters, and they will do fine, and they are already benefiting. They don't have to. Nobody has to prod them. Nobody has to convince them to do them, because they're embracing the new situation already. And then you have the majority in the middle who will adapt eventually, possibly with some help. At the same time, at the other extreme, you have the bottom Y%, which will not be able to adapt, and they will need public support. In other words, they will need to have some kind of transfers from the successful to the people who cannot adapt. So these percentages are in every country will have these percentages, but we don't know what they are. And the precise numbers depend on policy and depend on things like educational policy, health policy, social policy. So what it means is that the social and educational policy have to be aware of these new issues, and they have to reinvent themselves in order to be able to answer these problems, because adaptability, the ability to live and successfully in a world where everybody's living longer, will be the new secret of success. So, planet longevity. So in the 17th century, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes wrote of life. He was not known as an optimist. He says that life is nasty, brutish, and short. So how worse can it be when it becomes nasty, brutish, and long? So the question is this: simply the quantitative side of being able to live longer has to somehow be transferred into successful living. So adaptation is the key. The adaptation is first start with each one of us separately. It's an individual thing. The social policy and the governments and the pension foundations, etc., they will adapt, but they will adapt after individuals adapt. So this adaptation will come to in the question of this section of planning lives, which each individual's our own life is subject to macro societal influences. And I heartily recommend two books which came out in English in the last 3 or 4 years. First is a book by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott. It was called The 100-Year Life. And that actually starts with the picture I gave you in the verbal demographic data. It says, it starts on the observation that someone, a girl, who was born at the turn of the century and who is now 21, in most countries actually will have, has more than 50% chance to live more than 100 years. So the question is, someone comes along and tells you your wishes, your prayers have been answered. You will now live 100 years. The question is, how do you live those 100 years? How do you plan to live those 100 years? And this is the starting point of the book. And the point of the book is you have to live this 100 years in a very different type of world, which is more globalized, which has different technology, in which working, the type of working and available, the type of social relations and family relations are different from what it was. So you cannot assume that things were the same. The second book is by Camilla Cavendish. It's called Extra Time. And extra time, what it refers to is that life was a football match. A football match lasts 90 minutes. And if there's a draw at 90 minutes, the match goes into extra time. So you have to pay for another 30 minutes after the 90th minute. So, and the match can still be won or lost in extra time. So the story is that we are playing in extra time. You can win in extra time or you can lose it in extra time. So the question is, how do you win in extra time? So, and this is where the study of aging and overcoming stereotypes has to come in. So, stereotypes we can call the ages of man. This man there is a bouzouki player, and a Greek bouzouki player that you can actually play. I don't know whether no. Sorry. You can listen to it in at your own page. The point, the book, the song is about. It was written in 1971. It's about a 50-year-old who is nowadays is like a 20-year-old used to be in the older times, and whereas previously they used to serve, when you came 50. Everyone called you an old man, but now they say that is the 50-year-old. The 50-year-old is the young man of today. He walks like a 20-year-old and is handsome as a lover. So I don't know whether you like bouzouki, but he's one of the classics of Greek bouzouki, just to liven things up. This business about a 50-year-old as the young man of today was decided that this man, Emile Ratelband, he actually decided to take it to courts. In 2018, he went to the Dutch court, and he was 69, he was a pensioner. And he went to court asking to reduce his legal age in his identity papers to 49. And his point is that, nowadays, certainly in Holland, you can change your gender and why not your age? So he thought that being 69 was making, because what he really was concerned was finding girlfriends in Tinder. And his point is that, when the girlfriend saw that he was 69, they said, forget it. So he went to court, said he want to change my my date of birth, and he also supplied a certificate from his doctor saying that his body was 20 years younger. And interestingly enough, he was saying that, I have a pension, I'm willing to give it up, just as long as I can say truthfully and legally that I'm 20 years younger. I'm 49 and not 69. And he also said that both of his parents were dead, so that wouldn't create problems because what would happen if your child is older than you are. So he said that's no problem. However, the court denied the request on administrative grounds. It would make life very complicated for the bureaucrats. So, but the point is that he decided, with a bouzouki player, that life at 69 is not what it is taken to be, and he would very much like to be 49. So what it means the ages of man, and what we use a single word, age. So even if we're not Dutch, like Emil Ratterbland, we can distinguish different notions of age. So we can have a chronological age, which is what my ID card said, which is the Emil Ratterbland case. We have the biological age, which is what his doctor said he was. We have the social age, what my friends say, how do you behave? Economic age, what my wallet says, how you work, what your activity is, and possibly a political age, what my friends in the cafe, which I discuss the political gossip every day, say. You have, so the question of age is not something which you can read off somebody's ID and immediately ID card and immediately have a picture of what this person, man or woman, is going to be like, stereotype. At the very least, what we're talking at least two very broad groups in the aged. One is the young old, who are active socially and economically, with the new middle age, the people who have they've left or are leaving the labor market, but are still very healthy, active, and in most countries relatively well off. And then you have the older old, which are for whom worry, and they require constant care. So in any case, you need to discuss at the very least these two: the young old, 65 to 80 conventionally, and the oldest old, 80 plus. Now, this cutoff, the 65, 80, are not given. I mean, we may use them because we have to decide something. Their identities are not given, and they may change from one social location to another, from one country to another, from one social class to another, from between rural and urban, between genders. So we're talking about dynamic categories, but they're all subject to change. So the study of aging is really trying to find the trade-off between where objective issues change with age, health, productivity falls, cognitive issues, which are inevitable in older ages, and other social issues, which are really just social constructs, and the stereotypes which often reflect a situation which was in older times, rather, because stereotypes are distilling experience of the past and are ignoring the future. So, I mean, to give you a very keen idea, so we have, what is a 60-year-old? And here you have pictures of two sets of women, both 60. We have the grandmothers of the Second World War, who were born in 1880, so they were 60 in 1940. And then you have grandmothers of today. They have the same age, but they behave, and their social, economic, and health situation is very different. And the problem about stereotypes is that very frequently we have something, we think of a 60-year-old and our mind goes to the left photograph, whereas in fact, we are dealing with a situation which is the right. So this is the first part of my presentation. I don't know if there are any questions. The first part of the question is how is aging, and why? What are the knowledge gaps we are trying to fill? Which leads me, I don't know. Are there any questions before I move to the second part? We're moving to the actual. We talked about the need, the type of the need for information, and now we're saying how do we actually go about obtaining this information to ask these questions? Yes. There's a question, Hasham.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I mean, I enjoyed very much your presentation. And
Well, there's more. We haven't finished yet, but
yeah, and being you were living in Egypt, and I've been
right.
to Greece, and I felt that Greek people are pretty close to Egyptians, especially in Alexandria and the area around. So thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. First,
Yeah.
I think we already have an opportunity now with all the studies done in Scandinavia versus India, for example. We'd like really to know if there are any studies done in comparing the results of these works, because this will help us a lot in, in our in starting our work in Egypt.
Absolutely. This is where I start, because the point, the type of data we have for different countries were not comparable. So, and also the researchers and public policy, they were used to living in their country as if it was as an island, completely unconnected with the rest of the world. The point about aging as a process is something which is taking place everywhere. Now, so it's because it's a human process, and very large parts of it are biological. Others are social, and you have some common social structures. And so there's a lot that countries can learn from each other. But in order to learn from each other, they must be given the instruments to be able to communicate. So the existence of interdisciplinary services which are internationally comparable allows this process of mutual learning, because all these open questions we mentioned cannot be answered in a single country at a time. And each single country, Egypt has a lot to learn from Scandinavia, has a lot to learn from India, has got a lot to learn from Greece. But in order to do so, we must be able to measure and the similar structures, so that so this discussion can take place. This is essentially what, if you allow me, this is what the second part of my talk is about. Is exactly that. We have some basic areas of ignorance which affect the whole world, because no country, the process of aging is something which is happening in all countries, and it's a new thing. It's ahead of us, and in order to answer it, you need to be able to draw experience of lots of different countries together. And this is, if you have completely national data which cannot communicate, this process of learning from each other is very hard. So what, if you like, what we're saying is that this planet longevity is something which is ahead of us. So like these guys here of the Starship Enterprise, they look through the window of the spaceship to the planet that was approaching, and they're just wondering what the hell it's like. So what the hell is like is a question of the data. So
Yeah, my second question
Yeah.
really about, I mean, we have really new changes, even in the environment around us now.
Yeah.
One of them was a new pandemic of COVID-19. Now we have environmental changes, and we know that the COVID-19 wiped away very large number of older age, especially in Europe. What will be the effect of such health problems? And I think we have really to look at our data, after and before, because I think there is a lot of change. I am very happy that this sort of data can be taken for a longer period of time, so we can make some differences and looking to our data more carefully, just to even to take decisions about what needs to be done. So, is there any data in Europe about that? Because I
yes,
think,
well, this at the moment,
yeah.
share was in the field in March 2020 in the 8th wave, and that was the pandemic and the lockdowns took place, and so the collection of data was stopped at its tracks. And that was actually one a very clever idea. Rather than just giving up because they couldn't collect any data any longer, of the people who have in the share sample in July 2020, and again in June, it's taking place now. In the summer of 2021, designed to answer exactly what your question is, the experiences on COVID, both the experiences directly, the people who might have known or have been affected, that they fell ill with COVID, but also the impact on their lives, the problems of accessing healthcare, etc. And one, the value added of share comes out in the comparisons, for example, in places like in long-term care, so to the very old, the over 80s, in places like Belgium and Scandinavia, the percentage of people over 80 who living in old age people homes, formal old age people homes, is much higher than in Southern Europe. So Greece, Italy, Spain to a lesser extent, Portugal to a lesser extent, where all the people stay within the family. Now, and they're cared informally usually by their daughters or daughters-in-law. So the pandemic showed that the second model, which many people said that it's not modern, it's medieval, it's too traditional, etc., was actually more flexible and was able to adapt and to protect the people of the over 80 much more successfully in countries that didn't have formal old age homes, where the care, the decisive factor in care of the very old was the family rather than the municipality or the long-term care authority. So this is one example where, because the pandemic is exactly the sort of thing that something which a common data set such as share can be very useful, because it's the same challenge which meets countries which have very different social, political, and economic and social care systems. So the challenge of the pandemic was the same in Scandinavia, in Southern Europe, in Eastern Europe, and it was met by very different structures and different people and different mind frames etc. So because we we're actually studying this data now. So we're seeing how this common challenge was met well or badly in the 28 countries, because it's Israel and Switzerland as well. But this is the point.
Yeah.
That aging is aging and aspects to do with aging, such as the pandemic, are common across countries, and they are met by the same challenge is met in different countries. So there's a lot to learn about how the different countries adapt and respond to that. And it's important to study, not just to study, because it's also as a question of learning. Because in long-term care, the discussion is what people are thinking is what you need to have is some kind of cooperative system where you combine the family and formal care. And both the south of Europe is moving towards having a greater formal component. So the state will playing a more important role both in financing and providing some type of care. But also the Scandinavian countries are moving in the opposite direction. So they started off with a system which was purely formal, with the family very little involved, but they're trying to involve the family more and more. So this is a question where this is an example where policy discussion and awareness of what's happening in different countries is leading to a synthesis. So anyway, so we have the need, we have the sort of body of ignorance, those open questions. What type of data do we need? The first thing to note about the type of data we need is that it has to be interdisciplinary. It can't be a survey done just by doctors, economists, sociologists, whatever. So aging is a process which is very complex and which needs to input from lots of different disciplines simultaneously. So you have physiology, the condition of healthcare, psychology, way of life, attitudes, economics, working, retirement, finances, sociology, social networks, family, friends, anthropology and ethnography, cultural differences, what a certain word can mean one thing in one place and something completely different in another. So in order to be able to study aging, what you need to do is to overcome what are known as the academic silo. So the phenomenon of academic disciplines talking only to each other. Medics talking to medics, economists talking to economists. It's a very natural development, and universities are structured in such a way that they're keeping the academic disciplines separate. What there needs to do is to break the barriers, so to actually have the possibility of working together, and the possibility of working together and the means of working together, having the language and the data. So that means that you have generic questionnaires which are independent of current definitions. So that's the first requirement of data, is it has to be interdisciplinary. The second is what we were just talking about. It has to be internationally comparable, because the two major reasons. The second is what we talked about first, is you can see the world as a depository of good, but also bad practice. So an idea that worked in Finland, maybe in long-term care, maybe in meeting the pandemic. The pandemic had a very sort of beneficial effect in encouraging this type of cooperation, because all the world now is pouring at data, and we're all wondering how come the country next door is doing better or worse than us. What is it that we're doing well? What is it that we could do better? So it's in this process of learning from each other and using the world as a scientific laboratories, for example, is much advanced. I mean, it was helped along very much by the pandemic. Now, the first point there is more statistical, in that if you try to study something, institutions within countries change very slowly at a glacial pace. So if you wanted to study the pension system, if the pension system hasn't changed, the basic idea of a pension system hasn't changed for 30 years, what you essentially have is a single statistical observation. And when you're thinking of how would I reform something to be completely different, you can't use observations from your same country, because it's essentially there is the observation of a single point. Once you have a lot of countries together, what you do is then you create statistical dispersion, which is what you need in statistics in order to be able to estimate relationships. So what you need to do is this terrible word that econometricians use, multicollinearity. So multicollinearity is when you don't have very much dispersion on the data. So if you're adding other countries and you add them in a way that allows the data to be used as a whole, then that deals with the issue of which gives you the type of dispersion you need in order to estimate structural relationships statistically. So, and this is actually the reason why SHARE was developed, was that the Health Retirement Survey in the United States, which had been running since '93, they actually had exactly that problem, is that when thinking, the US Social Security system hadn't changed since 1937. Well, again, it was changed in 1980, but the basic logic of the system had to remain the same for a very long time, decades. So if they wanted to see how things might be otherwise, what they wanted is to be able to rely on experience of other countries. So it was the people from HRS the health retirement system in the United States were very instrumental in encouraging and financing the collection of SHARE in Europe. And it was always designed right from the start as a survey which can be used together with the health retirement survey. So in exactly the way that each different countries we can think of it as having a shot at the same target, the target being successful aging. And we have, if we have 28 countries in SHARE, we have 28 different shots at the same target. Now, the third dimension is to do with longitudinal, is the panel data, the idea, the necessity to be able to follow the aging process of particular individuals over time. So you have a panel survey. So why do you need to do this? You need to do this in order to distinguish that picture that we saw, the 60-year-olds of 1940 as opposed to the 60-year-old of 2020. they have the same age, but they're two different cohorts. And if you have panel data, you can distinguish those two. The second is by having panel data, you can distinguish cause and effect. For example, if you look at it in a survey, any survey, you will see that the people who are poor in health are usually also not rich. The richer people tend to be healthier. Now, this could be for two reasons. There could be that sick people can't work, so it goes from health to poverty, or rich people can buy better care and better quality of life, so it goes from poverty to health, the causation. So if you have a single survey, what you can do is all you can say is that the two things are associated. But if you have a panel data, so if you have the same person, and you can tell that somebody, for example, in wave 2 lost his job, and then in wave 3 develops a health condition, or the other way around, you can actually tell which comes first and which comes after. So you can discern causation. And finally, the dimension of time, obviously, is key in aging. So it is very important to be able to examine life as a whole, cradle to grave, and to look at life as inequality as something that affects entire lives and not just points in time. To look at life as a whole it requires much richer data that we have. What we tend to have, the sort of statistical data we have, are cross-section surveys, which are essentially photographs at a point in time. And what we would really want to be able to study aging is to have a film. So you have photographs at lots of different points in time, which allow you to tell a story, to follow a process. And of course, in aging, one of the reasons why you should look at whole lives is that we very frequently see the impact of distant effects, for example, in childhood, on the current situation of people who had a difficult childhood, for example, aged differently. People who experienced traumatic events or dramatic illnesses in their childhood have echo effects of these when they become older. So those are the three. And the fourth aspect in aging is you have to have what you could be called age-friendly data collection. Now, the older people in society are silent. I mean, they're taken for granted. I mean, this is the problem of the stereotypes. So that is also followed in because they have particular difficulties in being surveyed. They're very often missed out in the sampling, or when a survey takes place and looks at a household, what tends to happen is that there is a single respondent who answers on behalf of the whole household, and that tends to underrepresent the very old, but also women. So it's important to because the aging is something which has a very important gender dimension which cannot be missed out. And women live longer, but also acquire and they age differently from men. One of the just an aside, one of the most interesting things that came out from SHARE and right from the first thing is that there is a very important statistical association with retirement, so giving up work, taking up a pension, and depression. But that's the interesting thing is this causal link between giving up work and clinical depression affects only men. The reason, because for men, the occupation of their job is much a more vital part of their self-image than women. Women in all countries have a lot of roles simultaneously. There might be working, there might be mothers, grandmothers, carers, etc. So when a woman gave up her job, the job was only a part of her total identity. So the transition from work to retirement was much smoother in the case of women than in the case of men who went into deep depression. So the challenge in SHARE, and this is the challenge which is ahead of you now, is to overcome the types of issues which in other surveys essentially deny voice to the older people. And there are a number of decisions in running SHARE which are designed to protect and secure the participation of old and very old people in the survey. So this care that all members of the household reply, and not just the single responded. There's, the questions that capture the nature of solidarity and the nature of support within the family or the social unit. Proxy interviews for those who are unable to answer, who might be bedridden or who might be the cognitive impairment. Exit interviews to capture the last few months of life, which are crucial. It's certainly crucial for healthcare, but also for the general well-being. Retrospective questions to cover key aspects, key events of the past, such as childhood, illnesses, traumatic events, what I just talked about, migration. Rural-urban migration is something which is, because in Greece, and I think the same in Egypt, most city dwellers of that age were actually born in villages, and they keep very active links with the villages, and which is something which you cannot miss out. They try to follow the progress of physical frailty, cognitive decline, and psychological changes. That you need measurements of how these things are progressing, because the characteristics of age is this waning of ability that has to be monitored. And cultural and generational differences have to be respected, because if you don't take note of these, you might end up with having severe problems with the data in the sense of selective participation, etc. And all these amount of careful training of interviewers, quality checks, piloting of questions, etc., etc. So what an aging survey has to be a survey driven by science. The type of questions, the type of processes that a survey must follow in order to be successful must result from science. And this is key. It's not, because most surveys are very frequently conducted by bodies of the government, state statistical surveys, etc. And their concern is primarily administrative or bureaucratic, because there are certain boxes that need to be ticked, certain legal categories that need to be answered, etc., etc. Now, these are not the things that an aging researcher is interested in. So the questions have to result from the hypothesis, the scientific hypothesis that need to be answered, and the notions have to conform with that, rather than the legal categories which are in the mind of an administrator. So this is how, this is the background to SHARE. SHARE was designed to meet those four things. It was a pioneer in Europe. As I said before, it was essentially a transfer of the US Health Retirement Survey, and the National Institute of Aging in the United States wanted to use the diversity of Europe as essentially, it's like a research laboratory, as a resource to be able to answer the type of questions that would interest the Americans. This is the interesting thing, is that it's an investment to build a data set, not to answer a specific, say, an American question, a Swedish question, an Egyptian question, but to provide the answer to a question which affects all the aging process across the world. So in order to have that, it's important to have common generic questions, which are, this is a bit of a culture shock, because people living in Egypt, for example, they're used to thinking of categories of pensions that's delivered from a particular body, and they're used to calling it with the name, the legal name of the pension provider. So, but in order to be able to put the Egyptian data together with Greek data or Jordanian or whatever, you need to have categories which are common in all countries. So that means to have generic questions rather than administrative links. So that means that could create a problem of understanding at the level of the respondents. So that is very important that interviewer training takes place in order to guide the participants around these generic questions, which might not be familiar to them. So in Greece, for example, and I'll talk about this again, it was the first survey conducted by using a laptop. Up to then, all surveys were paper-based. It was the first national panel survey. It was one of the first interdisciplinary studies. It's the single regular interdisciplinary study. And one thing which is important in Greece, but not in others, is that it's in a system which is very fragmented. It's a very large number of pension providers and very little exchange of information between bodies. So that meant, for example, that the pension system had, they would pay pensions to somebody, but had no idea what their health status was, or whether they needed some help with long-term care, because each of these needs was in a different box. So, despite the fact that the needs of a person were common, and they were across the pension field, health field, care, and social fields, each provider of social services would only see one part of this. And a survey, an interdisciplinary survey like SHARE, would allow someone in Greece, for example, to be able to link those areas of experience together, which is with the data that existed up to 2004 was not feasible. And since in the last 10 years or so, this the idea of having a comparable data across the world is spreading. So there's a number of there's SHARE comparable data on which a very large percentage of questions are comparable, so they can actually be analyzed together. Not all. Some naturally decide to have different focus. I mean, the TILDA, the Irish survey, is a much more medical survey than SHARE. There's equivalents in Japan, Korea, China, India, etc. And the one difference is because share comes along. The key point about share is that it is an international survey. But if you look at it from the point of view of an individual country, its value added is a factor of what other surveys already existed. For example, in Greece, we didn't have any panel data, any survey following the panel survey following the population, and very few interdisciplinary data. In Finland, for example, they had a very large pre-existing panel survey, so for them to participate in share compared with the data that they already had was seen by many as a step backwards, because their local data was more was better than, well, they thought was better than share. So the value added of participating in share was not immediately apparent. So the value added in a particular country of this international participating in share is a function of what the local statistical infrastructure already contains. And places like Eastern Europe, Greece, Cyprus, and so on, had and for reasons that we might talk about in a minute, had the far more behind statistical infrastructure than in others. Typically, the Scandinavians and the north of Europe had, and the US and federal countries were very well endowed with statistical surveys, whereas in places like Greece, share in very many respects had to be like something like an icebreaker, something like it was a number of firsts that it had to contend with. That translated to a situation which just said that it can't be done. That our initial reaction takes us to the Greek experience, is that, this is sort of thing, yeah, it's fine, you can do it in Germany, you can do it in Belgium, you can do it in all these countries, but in this part of the Mediterranean, forget it, it's not possible. So this is where, but the idea, if you look at it, if you look at share as an international resource, it is more important to advance in countries like Greece or Egypt, where such surveys don't exist or are relatively unknown, rather than adding yet another this type of survey in areas which are already well known. So the importance of things of something like share is that it's progressing in parts of Europe which were very badly covered in terms of statistical infrastructure. So and adding places like Greece or Egypt is important it fills out, if you think of the world as a jigsaw puzzle, it fills parts of the jigsaw puzzle which are completely blank. So this takes me to the third, reflections on Greece. Are there any questions on share in general? before I, because what I would need to know is actually to talk about, you know, the experience of implementing and using share in Greece. Okay.
I was,
Yes.
I'm Hisham again.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering because, you know, sometimes we take the country as, you know, as a whole, as
Yeah.
if it is just very homogeneous population, which is not the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is, yeah.
Yeah, and in many countries, I mean, if I put Egypt, for example, you have urban and rural, which is a very simple way of just dividing. Pension, there is pension mainly in the urban community and very few in the rural. In the rural, it's very different. And this will make, especially economical part, will make a big difference. There are other populations, for example, in South Africa. In South Africa, I've been many times there. We have actually three different communities, which are very different. You know, you have the European, the old Europeans, and you have the Indian, and you have the Black group. They are very different. You cannot really use them or, you know, study them as one group. I wonder, for example, do you have the same problem in Greece or in
Yeah.
other countries?
This is the
And
point.
they ratify their work or not, or certify their sample before starting, because I think this will, you know, will be very important in drawing any, you know, any conclusions from
Yeah.
our work or any plans. Yeah.
You see, we all come from from an environment where we think of countries as islands, as units. Whereas what in something like share allows you to look at individuals. One thing which actually we find still trying to work in is, so we did with Antigone Liberakis, the other member of the team, a study of women, professional women, and we compared Swedish type women in Greece with Greek type women in Sweden. So for example, Swedish women work, they work much more. They stay at work for longer. The gender pay gaps, etc., much lower, etc., etc. They're much more integrated. But there's a minority of women in Sweden who are very who conform to traditional stereotype, housewife, etc., which is the dominant stereotype in Greece. However, in Greece there is a minority of women who behave like Swedish women, who are career women, who have worked. And so, in each country, this group was a minority, and they knew they were a minority. But they had. So the question was: are Swedish type women in Greece? How were they more common with the majority in Greece, or what do they share with Greek type women in Sweden? So the availability of share is encourage you to think in those terms, to think in terms of individuals rather than countries or societies. Now, countries and societies, they intervene in this process. We have different institutions, different social rights, different social, different social policies, economic policies, etc. So research effort that is taking place in SHARE is to create a database of social and economic policies of the SHARE member countries. So, for example, I mean, this is a database that's maternity leave in Sweden or in Greece in 1985. Because the point, if you want to Swedish and Greek women who gave birth, for example, in 1985, you have to know what was the law applicable in Sweden in 1985 and what was the law applicable in Greece in 1985. It's not sufficient because the situation in Sweden and Greece now might have nothing in common of what was the situation when those children were born. And if you look at what you're interested in is to model the decisions and the situation of people who were at the time when these decisions were taken. And at the time these decisions were taken, you need there were different policies and different laws in force in those two different countries. And the point is, in order to be able you need to be able to associate each a decision, for example, to have a child in 1960, which is this is the time frame that we would be interested in aging survey in different countries. And at that time, the rights of a woman giving birth might have been were very different between the various countries, but also very different from what they are now. So there is a data set called Splash, and you can access it through the SHARE website, which allows any researcher who can download the data can also download a set of policies. So you can, for example, what was the pensions is something is a question which is common across. So you're know from the survey that someone retired in 1995. What you need to know is at that time, what was the pension retirement age in that particular country that he was. So the Splash data set allows you to match a particular year and a particular event with a legal structure. And that allows you to be able to use the individual data not separately for each country, but as a whole. The reason it's very important to do this for statistical reasons, if nothing else, because as you are studying more and more specific cases, what and if you limit yourselves to situations within each country, you will end up having a very low sample size. So it's important to be able to group observations from lots of countries together in order to increase the sample size. But in order to do that, you need to somehow parameterize the differences between the countries. In Europe, what we tend to do is that we tend to lump various countries together, the countries of the South, the countries of East, the West, and the Nordic Scandinavia, which have roughly similar social systems, etc. But it's better to go one step beyond that and actually have the specific differences between them. In terms of econometrics, what the simplest and laziest way of doing it is just to have a dummy variable saying, and that dummy variable, which say Greece or Spain, or in the future Egypt. The thing about this dummy variable, it absorbs all the special things which are common to the Greek sample. And those special things might be actually part of what you're trying to explain. So in terms of research, this is an ongoing endeavor and ongoing attempt, and it's where all the interest lies. I mean, because typically when a new survey comes in, what you have is that you get the researchers from different countries. Then you have tables which says Italy so and so, Greece is so and so, and you have a beauty contest of countries, who is highest, who is lowest. But the point, if you want to get deeper into the aging process, you have to give up the idea that countries are intrinsically different and try to see what these why one country is different from another, what features about the institutional framework of that country is the thing that encourages them, Greeks, to behave differently, for example, than Italians. If you just have them as separate surveys, what you're essentially saying is that there is something inherently different in the DNA of Italians and Greece and Greeks, and so we estimate separate relationships because there's no point in comparing them. Whereas at the center of the starting point of share is that there are no differences between countries, and we have to approach, we have to try to explain what is it, from where those differences result. But in order to have that, you have to have detailed data on the basis of individuals, which can be compared from one country to the other. So we need the one question that has been answered in Italy and another question that has been answered in Greece. You have to be confident that they are comparable, that you can use them together, rather than just have one statistical relationship for the Italians and another for the Greeks. And this is where it's a question of the quality of the survey. A good quality survey should allow to treat all countries which participate in share in the same way, for example, that in the US you would treat all states of the United States in a single data set. And you don't say that people in California are different to people in New York. This is something that people do in the United States unthinkingly, but this is something that in Europe we're still trying to attain. And in order to do that, we need to have comparable data, but also we need to parameterize, to define what is the different points between different countries in terms of institutions and structures, etc. So an example. So the point is that, delivering one more country to share is actually is conferring an external benefit to researchers using share in all other countries, because it's like this idea of the map is that you have an empty area of the map which is being filled in. That is important for the people who are interested in that particular bit of the map, for all those interested in Greece, for all those interested in Egypt. But filling in Greece or filling in Egypt gives you a better map, better overall map. So it is an external benefit, and it's something that all users of shares should try to ensure that there is the best quality data for the largest number of possible countries. So Greece and shares. So what Greece?
Sir Plato,
Yeah.
I have a question about the time.
Yes.
How time do you need for the rest of the lecture?
Probably another half hour.
Do you prefer, I'm asking that Renee, do you prefer to complete or have a break and then complete?
I think it was probably a break will be a better idea for half an hour.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, because I can see, I'll see whether Vicky Avsimakopoulou can give you those anecdotes from Share. And so we meet in half an hour's time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Right.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.